5 patients, 12 experts, 45 academic medical articles. A tidal wave of regret is heading our way. Is our society equipped to face the harms of so-called gender-affirming care and to reckon with what the medical establishment has done to detransitioners? Learn what these brave souls have been through and how you can help. Watch our film, No Way Back: The Reality of Gender-Affirming Care. Formerly known as Affirmation Generation, we are proud to announce we have been picked up by a global distributor. The tide is turning. Visit our website at nowaybackfilm.com.
When I look at this from a memetics perspective, the ideology has evolved to fit all of these niches perfectly. And so it's this new phenomenon where it's not like a traditional cult where there's one kind of leader. It's not like a traditional religion where it's offering a clear idea of salvation, though there is hidden in it this idea of salvation where if you just take the medicine, so to speak, if you go down this role of transition, all of your problems are going to get solved. So it shares a lot of elements with traditional cults and traditional religions, and at the same time, I really feel that this is a new phenomenon, and it shares, and it's got characteristics that we've never seen before, all combined into one social phenomenon.
You must be some kind of therapist.
I am some kind of therapist, and I'm about to take you on a journey through the inner wilderness. I've invited brilliant guests from all walks of life to join me as we investigate, illuminate, and inspire transformation in ourselves, intimate relationships, and the social ecosystems we are constellated in. What you are about to hear may surprise you, so hang on to your earbuds for a hefty dose of sanity in a chaotic world. I am Stephanie Wynn, a licensed marriage and family therapist, branching out and building bridges between psychology and everything else under the sun. It's my honor to have you along for the ride. Let's get started. Well, today I'm joined by a very interesting guest by the name of Alan Michael, who's reached out to me about a unique intersection of issues. As you know, on this podcast, I like to talk about things that are on the fringe and taboo. I'm very interested in the subject of psychedelics and detransition, for example. And if you're interested in the intersection of those two issues, I would recommend you check out my past episodes with Laura Becker and Torin Danowski. Well, bridging from there, today we have an ROGD parent, that is a parent of a child with rapid-onset gender dysphoria, who has also found some life-changing experiences through psychedelics. Now, of course, I have to say this up front, none of this should be construed as medical advice or therapeutic advice. I do not recommend that people engage in illegal activities. But that said, as a podcast on the topic of psychology, there are a few things that spark awareness of one's own psyche in quite the profound way that psychedelics do. So I think that people's stories of psychedelic experiences are very much worth listening to for anyone who's interested in the mind, body, and spirit. So today, Alan's going to share with us about the unique challenges that he's had in parenting a child with rapid onset gender dysphoria and how his experiences with psychedelics have given him insight and tools into how can he be there for his family. Alan's background is pretty interesting in some other ways too. He has escaped a cult. He has a background both in spirituality and science and technology, holding a Bachelor of Science in Electrical Engineering, as well as a Master's of Divinity. Plus, he's a father of 5. So lots of interesting experience to draw from here. And I'm so excited that someone with such a unique story to share has reached out to me about coming on the podcast. As you can imagine, for the sake of protecting his privacy and that of his family, this is an audio-only episode. So if you're watching on YouTube, this is all it's going to be, audio. You might as well switch to a podcast listening app if that's your preference, but do this however you want. Anyway, Alan, it's great to have you. Thanks for joining me today.
My pleasure. Glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
So tell me about what inspired you to reach out to me with your story.
Well, like many parents who have children that have gotten involved with the gender ideology. Um, it's been a really huge struggle uh, trying to help her navigate and trying to and then at the same time trying to navigate myself, and also for my wife as well, trying to navigate the landscape. And it's like all of a sudden we're in this crazy dystopia where we can't trust professionals. We can't, um, you know, uh, not that we should have ever felt safe just letting our kids roam free on the internet, but now it's even worse because, it's just like, uh, our daughter is kind of like a bug going to a bug light where she's going to want to look up everything about gender. And, all of the information that's out there is so skewed. So, you know, it's, it, it's a very difficult, challenging time as a parent, and um, trying to navigate that. I've had to really look inwardly and say, how can I maintain my inner peace in the most profound way possible so that I can be available as a parent? And thankfully, the tools that I have at my disposal are ones that I've used in other parts of my life. As you mentioned, I was involved with a cult. Unfortunately, I was in a cult for about 12 years, and um, I suffered complex post-traumatic stress disorder from my time there. It was extremely abusive. Um, Imagine getting screamed at multiple times a week for 12 years and watching other people get abused regularly. It's uh, devastating to one's psyche. So, in order to find healing from post-traumatic stress disorder, I found some local therapists who work with psychedelics, and I was able to um, go on what we call a psychedelic therapy session. It's called a journey, right? So I've been on a few psychedelic journeys, therapeutic journeys, where um, we've done one with cannabis, one with MDMA, one with MDMA and psilocybin, and all of those journeys together kind of have resulted in a significant recovery from post-traumatic stress disorder. I wouldn't say that I'm completely healed. There's still lingering effects that I deal with. And but it's been by and large almost a complete healing. And also the other major tool that I've had to leverage over the years is mindfulness and meditation. So that's a very big part of my daily diet, and it's a big part of how I've try to maintain my balance while navigating these really rough parenting waters.
You talk about achieving almost complete healing from a few sessions of psychedelic assisted therapy. And I think for people who are new to hearing things like this, it sounds so extreme, so, too good to be true. And established mental health professionals in the field who aren't familiar or are skeptical, understandably, toward these novel and as of yet illegal practices would typically say that the type of complex PTSD you described could take years of therapy. People are in different camps. Some people swear by, techniques like EMDR, for example. But you described this deep level of psychological abuse that was your entire life, your entire community. And I'm sure we could do a whole episode just on the subject of leaving that cult. But there's a lot of intersecting ideas here. So let's just kind of start with that. I mean, when you say that a few psychedelic assisted therapy sessions helped you so drastically with your complex PTSD, what do you attribute
Yeah,
that
I mean,
to?
this the
How do you make sense of
psychedelic
that?
experience is so profound, and um, I I look at it in a few different ways. Like on a brain level, I think let me paint a little bit of a picture, because you talked about traditional therapy, and I tried traditional therapy. I tried it with multiple therapists, and because I really hit a rock bottom kind of place, right? Like I couldn't even interact with my family anymore because I would get triggered so easily, and the slightest thing would have me up in the bedroom shaking in a corner so that I wouldn't hurt my kids, because I could get so explosive. And um, like so for example, if one of my kids dropped something or broke a glass, like I would just erupt, and it was so disproportionate to what was going on, and I knew that this was going to be really damaging to them. So I had to isolate myself from my family. And um, so that's kind of the level of triggering that we're talking about. And so I tried therapy. I tried talk therapy, tried EMDR, and all of it was so re-triggering when I would think about the trauma and the incidents that I had been through, the kind of abuse that I had been through, that I couldn't manage it. Like I was at a point where I was going to lose my job because it was like either do the therapy or stay in your job because it was so emotionally difficult. And so I was desperate, right? And so I had been listening to Sam Harris quite a bit. He's a huge proponent of mindfulness meditation and also psychedelics. And I said, I'm going to try both of these things. So I found that mindfulness gave me a, a kind of a space that I could get some momentary relief. And we'll talk more about mindfulness. Hopefully we can talk more about mindfulness in this podcast. But then I said, I want to try some psilocybin, which is, another that's the scientific name for magic mushrooms. Um, or the chemical that's in magic mushrooms that actually breaks down to psilocin, which is the psychoactive component. But anyway, I said, I'm going to try microdosing psilocybin. So I tried microdosing a tenth of a gram of psilocybin, which is very small amount, and I uh, felt fine. I had a normal day at work. I got home, sat down for dinner. Normally, I would have just isolated myself, but I said, I'm going to try to be with my family. Sat down for dinner, and immediately one of my kids spilled a glass, shattered it all over the table. Normally, just the noise, the sound of that glass shattering would have been enough to trigger me, but it was like nothing happened. It was like, I can deal with this. This is almost a miracle. And I sat and had dinner with my family for the first time in weeks, and it was like, this is incredible. Then I found some therapists that do full on therapy sessions. And, so I think we could talk about cannabis a little bit, but I'd rather focus on MDMA because it's a much more powerful medicine for post-traumatic stress disorder. So I'll talk about my first MDMA session where, as soon as the medicine came on, I started remembering things about the traumatic experiences that happened to me that I hadn't thought about in years. I couldn't remember them. And so it triggered or facilitated my memory to open up. And because the MDMA quiets the fight or flight mechanism of your brain, um, it wasn't scary to talk about anymore. And so I just poured out the years of this trauma. And then, my therapist had asked me to bring some things from that trigger me, things that would normally have triggered me. And so I brought some of those objects, and maybe I'll pause in a minute to let you speak and ask some questions. But through that journey, I was able to essentially let go of the and let go and not just let go, but also um, reconcile and process so many of the things that had happened to me that were so frightening and so painful that I couldn't do it before. So that I think it with MDMA at least it's quieting down that the fight or flight mechanism, allowing you to bring those memories out of where they're kind of living in this constant present, because that's the thing with PTSD. It's like you haven't shifted those traumatic experiences from the present into the past, so you're living in this constant fight or flight state. And so I was able to make those things, help move those things into the past. And now when I think about those traumatic events, I'm thinking about something that happened to me a few years ago, not something that I'm living in right now.
And it's made a huge difference for your family. You were really isolated. You were
Oh, they have their dad
Yeah,
back.
wow. And you have 5 children. So what were their age ranges
Hmm.
during the time that you were withdrawing, and then when did this shift occur?
So, I would say the worst part of the PTSD was about 2 years ago. I left the cult about 8 years ago. So if it was like 6 years of this post-traumatic stress disorder kind of developing and manifesting. and my kids right now are 6 to 16. That's the age range. So, it would have been kind of 4 to 14 when I was really at the worst part of this PTSD.
So it was 2 years ago that you found these therapies so beneficial in giving you your life back. What was the impact of the cult on your family? It sounds like you were raising some of these kids in that environment for a time.
Yeah, yeah, that's right. So my my daughter, the one who has got involved with gender ideology and identifies as transgender, she was there for the first 8 years of her life.
Hmm. She's the oldest.
Yes.
And so coming around to how you started using psychedelics to help you deal with your daughter's crisis, you had found them so beneficial with your own PTSD. And then when your daughter presented with rapid onset gender dysphoria, it sounds like you felt like you needed to sort of break out the big guns, so to speak. Tell us about that journey. I read the story that you wrote and shared with me about that psychedelic experience where you went in sort of praying for your daughter. But fill our listeners in.
Yeah. Yeah. So um, I think for any of the parents who are dealing with this, I'm sure you can relate to just how challenging it can be. And I found myself getting pretty angry about the situation, feeling angry about, wherever you turn, that this ideology was rearing its head, and um, really feeling like uh, instead of giving my daughter the love that she needed and the understanding that she needed, I was focusing a little too much on the philosophical problems with gender ideology and stuff like that, and I just needed this kind of deep reset. So um, I went with some friends who are also very experienced with psychedelics, and we found a kind of a deep location in the woods, um, to have a psilocybin journey together. And so I took about, I want to say, roughly 2.5 grams of psilocybin, which it's a decent amount. Like, if you talk about amount of psychedelics, like 5 grams of psilocybin is considered a heroic dose where you have a full ego dissolution kind of experience. Then 2.5 grams is much more moderate, but still quite significant. And we with any psychedelic session, and for the listeners who are new to psychedelics, like, it's really really important that you have a good intention going into the journey. This is part of what's called set. There's kind of two key elements to psychedelics when in their use. It's called set and setting. So your set is your mindset, your intention. Why are you doing this? What are you hoping to get out of it? What is the environment that you're in? Sorry, that's getting into setting. And setting is, what environment are you in? Who are you doing it with? You got to be really careful, right? Like, if you're with the wrong people and you're taking psychedelics, you can have a really terrible experience. If your mindset is bad going into it, where, like, say you're already kind of paranoid about something, you can have a terrible experience. So you do have to be careful. But all three of us were quite experienced. We set our intentions out really clearly, and my intention for this was to figure out, not just figure out, but to understand, how can I kind of really at once let go, and let go of my daughter, in the sense that she needs to individuate. This part of this whole identity that she's going through, it's her search for individuation. She needs to find herself, figure out who she is. How can I let her do that, and not try to, you know, have her become who I want her to become? But so there's a letting go that I have to do as a parent. And at the same time, um, how can I release some of this anger and this frustration about this, the painfulness of this whole situation? So that was my intention going into it. We took the medicine. I sat in meditation for a while. I was sitting on this rock, and in this beautiful stream in the woods. sunlight's coming in through the trees. It was just an idyllic kind of setting. And then, the medicine came on, and it was just this incredible experience of, just, I guess you could call it power. It's like it's like your an energy is running through your body. And then I found a place to kind of be alone. I took a little bit of a walk. I stayed within eye shot and earshot of my friends. We all agreed beforehand that we would, kind of stay within visual distance of each other so we could make sure everybody was safe. And then, I just really started going into this deep experience where I felt the power of, what I would describe as Mother Earth. And when I talk about this, I'm not talking about this in a kind of woo-woo kind of way. I'm not trying to, you know, um, imbue the earth with some kind of spirit, or something like that. If people want to take it that way or believe that way, that's fine. For me, it was just more this presence of the powerful feminine, and the words that came to me through the power of earth was, don't hurt yourself, don't hurt yourself. And those were the words that came to me to tell my daughter. Really simple, and then I cried. I really let out a lot of the anger and sadness about the situation. I felt I had kind of visions of her ancestors, her grandparents, especially grandmothers, like the presence of motherhood and how important that was. And then I had this whole vision of DNA, where I saw the world from the perspective of the double helix, where I was projecting myself as the double helix through space and time, realizing that mothers and fathers, male and female, this ancient biological division is not arbitrary, and that it's in a sense, it's what we are, and it's what we are as DNA based creatures, and it's not just this flexible thing. It's essential for us as for our survival. And it was just kind of this deep vision. And then I kind of came out of all of that and rejoined my friends, and shared with them, some of my fears about that, this kind of medical industrial complex that wants to just, cut my kid apart, and how scary that was. And and just kind of released this tension. And then, kind of coming out of the journey, I was I I went home. I connected with my daughter, and it was much cleaner connection. It's almost like, you can think about cleaning the electrical connection on a plug, you know getting all that corrosion off, and now the current moves smoothly. And I was able to say to her, honey, don't hurt yourself. I want to give you that message. I love you. Don't hurt yourself. I understand why you're doing this. Don't hurt yourself. And so that was kind of a summary of that particular journey.
How are you sleeping? Sleep is a foundation of mental and physical health, equally important to nutrition and exercise, yet it's often the first thing to go during times of stress. Good sleep can help alleviate depression and anxiety symptoms, maintain a healthy weight and metabolism, protect your heart, and even reduce the risk of Alzheimer's. Yet still, a third of Americans struggle with sleep, and temperature is one of the main reasons. Before I got an 8 sleep, I was already an expert in sleep hygiene and practiced what I preached to my clients. But I would still wake up overheated in the middle of the night and unable to fall back asleep for 1 or 2 hours. Adjusting the air temperature and blankets was not enough. The mattress itself was keeping me hot. But now, I'm sleeping soundly through the night and waking up refreshed thanks to my 8 Sleep Pod Pro cover. The Pod Pro cover by 8 Sleep is the most advanced solution on the market for thermoregulation. It pairs dynamic cooling and heating with biometric tracking. The cover can adjust the temperature on each side of the bed individually for you and your partner based on your sleep stages, biometrics, and bedroom temperature, reacting intelligently to create the optimal sleeping environment. If you'd like to be more patient with your children, more emotionally stable with your partner, a fitter athlete, or more efficient at work, take it from me, a mental health professional. Improving your sleep is one of the best investments you can possibly make in your overall well-being and the lives of everyone you touch. Go to 8sleep.com to check out the pod and use the code SOMETHERAPIST at checkout to start sleeping cool this summer with up to $200 off your purchase. Even if they're already running another sale, this code will get you an additional $50 off. And yes, to my listeners around the world, 8Sleep currently ships not only within the USA, but also to Canada, the UK, select countries in the EU, and Australia. All right, now back to the show. Wow, that's so beautiful. And it brings up so much. This message, "Don't hurt yourself,"
Hmm.
reminds me of the conversation I had with Kat Pattinson on a previous episode. We talked about her process of detransition and reclaiming her voice as a singer after it was damaged by testosterone. And she also found that mindfulness practice played a pivotal role in her healing and awakening process. And she received sort of a similar message, if you will, through mindfulness meditation from what she also described as sort of a maternal energy that she connected to in herself. It was this loving and accepting
Hmm.
energy that sort of looked at her with sadness, like, do whatever you want, but it makes me sad to see you hurt yourself, was kind of the message that she got, as I remember it. I mean, go listen to that episode to hear it in her words, but it's so interesting to hear that coming through different people's experiences of looking for spirituality and healing and guidance through this crisis that has consumed so much of our society. And you had that from the parents' perspective. Um, and this vision of DNA is so interesting. I was trying to imagine it in my mind as I was listening to you speak and thinking about how when the sperm and
Mm.
egg come together, each is bringing its own piece of the DNA, and together they link up to form this beautiful spiral that is at the foundation of what makes us human. Um, and I love the intentions you went into with this, right? Because when you listen to different people's psychedelic
Hmm.
experiences and what makes them positive or negative overall, like you said, set and setting plays a big role. And if you go into a psychedelic experience trying to control something that ultimately is not yours to control, that is sort of a recipe for either having a difficult experience or having some very profound learning around that, right? Being the psychedelics can reflect to you your own kind of human ego and the limits of control. So you went into this, like so many parents that I hear, with this sense of um, actually the way you described it at the very beginning was that you needed a deep reset because you were caught up worrying about gender ideology rather than giving your daughter the love that she needs. And so let me just work with that part for a moment, because I hear this from so many
Mm.
parents that I work with on this issue, where the way I think of it is like gender ideology is like this black hole. It has this incredible gravitational pull. Anything that comes near it will get wrapped up in it. And so for young adults who are caught up in gender ideology, it becomes trans everything, right? Everything is about being queer or being trans. And it's like they lose sight of who they were beforehand. They're trying to reject their past self. They call it a dead name. And they only want to surround themselves with reminders of this group that they've aligned themselves with. And for parents, if they're not careful, they can end up in their own black hole. It's like a parallel black hole where gender touches everything in your life too. And so, just as your kid is obsessed with everything trans, you are also obsessed with everything trans, except you're doing it from the perspective of, how do I save my kid so that they're not permanently damaged? And so, a lot of parents actually miss out on the most precious moments for healing and reconnection with your kid because you're so worried. And you're thinking of it from this really intellectual place of how everything they're saying doesn't make sense and how you can refute it and how you can argue with it, that you kind of lose the heart and soul of the connection in your relationship. And the connection is what actually has the power to heal, right? So you went into this not trying to control, but recognizing there are limits to what you can control, limits to the power of your intellect to solve this problem. Um, and instead, with that noble intention, the sort of intention that psychedelics tend to work better with, which is, how do I let go of something I'm having a really hard time with because of my strong feelings. How do I release these overwhelming emotions that I quite understandably feel? Anger, frustration, helplessness. Um, and then there's this kind of free falling trust, right? This idea that if I let go just at the very moment that I want to hold on and control the most, maybe something good will come of that. Maybe there will be something I can achieve through releasing my attachment to the outcome, that I can't achieve in any other way. And from what I'm gathering from your story so far, and obviously I haven't heard all of it, it sounds like your daughter is still wrapped up in this, but that you were still able to find the value in reconnecting with her and in trusting your heart to lead that connection. Um, how does that reflection, as I'm hearing you, how does that land with you?
Yeah, you've said a lot there, and I really think that we're on the same wavelength here. You know, you um, there's definitely a risk to over intellectualizing. It's so important to um, give your child a, uh, it's almost like a second childhood is kind of what we're doing. Um, we are not trying to just focus on the gender stuff. We are trying to have as many positive experiences as possible, really focusing on the root. And I think in our case, the root is fairly clear. Our daughter suffered from trauma. She suffered in a religious cult, and she is trying to find a way to deal with that trauma. And, you know, creating a trans identity for herself is a way to package all of the pain and say that was the old me and now there's the new me. And so, for and she's even aware of that. She's said as much to us, to her therapist. She knows why she's doing it. It doesn't mean she wants to stop, but she is aware of that. So for us, it was like, how can we deal with the root here? And so, a lot of that has been um, trying to create as many positive experiences as possible. But also, I took her on a big trip back to the location where this cult was, where our old home was. We had to travel quite a long distance to visit the place where this happened. And we had a little ceremony there where she let go of some of these painful memories that were difficult for her as well. Um, and she reconnected with the land and places she remembered from her childhood growing up in the situation. So we did that, in conjunction with her therapist. So trying to deal with the root cause and not just focus on the ideological side is a big part of what we're doing here. Trying to connect with her as much as possible. We bought, for example, we bought ducks, so now she's taking care of these ducks, and it's giving, she's doing that instead of going on the internet, for example. We brought an archery set, so we're spending time as a family doing archery, and just how can we embrace her as much as possible and give her positive experiences so that she can kind of come back to and herself, I guess would be the way to put it, rather than just like going straight for the jugular and attacking the ideology itself.
I think that's so important. And although this is an audio only episode, I smiled when you talked about the ducks. That was a sweet image. Um, but I recommend things like this to parents all the time for a few reasons. One is that you cannot control, and that you also don't want to get sucked up into that black hole where you lose sight of what's important. You want to keep modeling for your family all the different things that life can be about that are meaningful and worthwhile. You want experiences that give your kids a broader sense of the world and an
Mm,
opportunity to build competence at things like taking care of animals and archery, because all of this this formation of a false self, this alter ego that kids construct, in this case, I mean, kids have always constructed alter egos, but now it's an alter ego of an opposite sex identity or some other gender identity. It serves a purpose to cover up for a self that feels weak and incapable of facing the world as they know it, right? So if you can give kids experiences that build a real sense of competence without locking in an identity too early, that's really healing, right? You can build competence through taking care of animals and shooting bows and arrows and other real visceral skills without having to attach yourself prematurely to, I am a duck farmer, I am an archer, right? And that's what they're doing with the gender identity is they're locking in an identity too early. We call that identity foreclosure in psychology. And another reason why these sorts of activities are so beneficial for ROGD kids is that given the fact that you ultimately can't control how long they're in this cult, how deep down the rabbit hole they go, how far they push medicalization, at least you're giving them something to come back to, even if they do go down that path. Right. So when I've worked with detransitioners, whether in a clinical context or just through talking to them on my podcast or in letter exchanges or other ways that I've connected with detransitioners, one theme that I've heard
Mm.
is having something to come back to that was yours all along. So it could be an art form. It usually is some kind of form of creative expression that the person, practiced mastery during that time in their life. And for some people, maybe it's too linked with their old community or their old sense of self. And when they detransition or desist, they feel like they have to reject or walk away from that chapter of their life. But more often, what I hear is that it helps them know that they were still them all along. Right. So let's say it's taking care of ducks, right? The example that you gave. Um, if if they loved taking care of ducks when they were a he him, um, and they still love taking care of ducks now that they're desisting or detransitioning and accepting their biological sex, then they don't have to do the whole thing all over again of trying to throw away your past self, right? They can separate the baby from the bathwater. And so then there is a consistent sense of self that's been there all along. I was always female, even if, heaven forbid, in some cases, even if I'm stuck with now this facial hair or these mastectomy scars or whatever it is that I'm stuck with, that I don't like. Now I'm having this whole other experience of so-called gender dysphoria with. At least there are some parts of me that have always been there. And when you're disoriented, it's so helpful to have, at least a few things that you can hold on to, whether it's that you formed an identity around that, which I said, you don't have to lock in that identity, or at least it's just a stable interest over time, or some positive memories to look back on so that you don't feel completely disoriented, especially given the fact that when people do detransition or desist, it's more likely to be, a few years down the line at a time in life, maybe in their 20s or 30s, where it would be helpful to at least have some elements of a foundation of a stable identity. Whereas this time during adolescence, when they are going through this phase of identifying as the opposite sex, is a time that um, it's normal to experiment. So I hope that makes sense. And I hope that any ROGD parents who are listening can find some value from this, right? That it's so important not to lose yourself in this, just like you don't want your kid to lose themselves. And even if you can't control ultimately how your child identifies or what they choose to do to their body, all is not lost. If you can give them some meaningful, positive experiences to look back on and some elements of forming a healthy sense of identity and competence, you're doing something. And it might prevent some of the worst harm from occurring.
Yeah, that's very encouraging. I definitely have questions around, when I say I have questions about my own approach to all of this, where I know that the things that we're doing are super positive and super helpful, and I really am encouraged by the things that you're saying, that you're almost giving them a bank account that they can draw from when they get older, no matter how far down the path they decide to go. Um, I think I do question, the level to which I should engage with the ideology. And and confront it, I guess. Um, I've instinctively kind of shied away from it because of the backfire effect. Where, I remember when I was a kid and I was a teenager, and I got involved with actually Orthodox Christianity, which, to share a little bit more background, the cult that we were involved with was a cult that was kind of hiding in the Orthodox Christian church. So it was a very odd situation. And I remember when I was converting to Orthodoxy as a teenager, the church that I was converting to was kind of culty, and my parents were really frightened. They thought I was joining a cult, and in many ways they were right. And I can tell you, there is very little they could have done short of a full on intervention, where somebody like gets kidnapped and deprogrammed. There's probably nothing they could have done or said to me that would have stopped me from believing the things that I wanted to believe or joining the community that I wanted to join. And it had a profound effect on my life. Uh, there are things obviously that were negative, because I ended up joining an abusive cult. There were things that were positive. You can't really untangle it all. I've learned a lot, but the point here is that, I there is little that I think I could say to her right now that would ever change her mind. But at the same time, it's like I struggle with, well, maybe I should say more and be more transparent about what I actually think, so that I'm at least saying it, and that at least she maybe can come back to some of those things. But it always feels like it's running this huge risk of alienation when the most important thing right now is connection. Anyway, all that to share that I really do struggle with what to talk intellectually with her about. Um, but in terms of not getting sucked into my own gender black hole where everything becomes about that, that's really where the mindfulness practice and, the occasional psychedelic, journey has been very helpful.
These questions that you raised come up several times a week for me in conversation because since I've been out there talking about these issues for the last couple of years, a significant portion of the people who come to me for therapy are ROGD parents. On top of that, I have a consulting practice for people who either aren't looking for therapy or they're not here in Oregon, so I can't provide therapy for them, but I do have my doors open to people who just want to pick my brain and get my honest opinion on what's going on in their situation. So I talk to parents like you all the time who have these very questions, and I feel like maybe we could, I don't know, not that this is role playing, that's not how I want to frame it, but that this is like a little sample of what one of those
Hmm.
conversations might look like, because so many families are navigating this and asking those exact questions that you are, Alan. So I think it's actually really good that you're going there, and let's go there a little bit. This question, should I say more, right? And navigating that sort of tightrope walk, that balance where you're having moments of connection with your kid. That is the most important thing. And, some of the best books on this subject, like Hold On to Your Kids and The Collapse of Parenting, which are in my bookshop, by the way. You can support the show by getting books through Amazon affiliate links at sometherapist.com/bookshop. I have a whole recommended reading list there, recommended reading for ROGD parents right after the section of authors who've been featured on the show. So check out those books on that reading list. But yeah, some of the best books that parents are using to support themselves through this time are more about that connection, right? From an attachment lens and also a lens of appropriate degrees of authoritativeness in the parent-child relationship. So at the same time, it feels like there's this ticking time bomb. Your kid is, however many years from turning 18, or maybe they're over 18 already, and they're on a path that leads toward medicalization, or maybe they're already starting to medicalize. So there is a sense of urgency that parents have about feeling like they need to kind of pull their kid out of it and get them to see from your own perspective. And yet here you have this dual perspective on this, Alan, because you were that kid once. You were a young adult in a cult, and there was nothing anyone could have done to get you out of it. So let's talk about this. So these questions that come up for you when you're thinking about should you tackle the issue more directly, um, walk us through whatever you're willing to share, of course, without compromising your family's privacy. But what are some of those moments of tension like for you? What are the choices that you find yourself facing with regard to what to say or not say?
Yeah, like there's so many instances when this can come up, right? Like for example, we've set very strict rules around the internet, and um, part of my daughter's descent into the RODG or ROGD cult has been via the internet. She had a friend who identified as transgender, and that's what kind of got her into it. Unbeknownst to us, she had watched something, probably thousands of YouTube videos. We didn't know this was going on. As soon as we found out, we pulled the plug on it, but it was too late, and that was all it took. And she, from that point on, has identified as a boy. Um, so we restrict the internet, and there's a lot of arguments around that where she's upset that we've taken the internet away, and she's like, why are you doing this? And it's like, well, there's just a lot of really dangerous ideologies out there, a lot of kind of online cults, and we've seen, and it's also not good for brain development, blah blah blah. But I'm not directly saying, well, it's because you're just going to get sucked into more trans activists videos. So that's an area where I haven't been direct with her. And it's a question, should we directly say that this is why? So that's one example. Uh, I can say something where, one thing that we did do together is we listened to the witch trials of J.K. Rowling. And I think that was good for her to hear. Um, for your audience members who haven't heard it, J.K. Rowling, author of Harry Potter, she got in a lot of she got a lot of backlash because she was posting things on Twitter about uh, her perspective on gender ideology, which she's very very critical of what's going on. And anyway, there's a great podcast series, The Witch Trials of J.K. Rowling, where it really gets into the whole history of gender ideology and J.K. Rowling's perspective. So I think that was a really good thing that we did together. That was actually touching on this subject. Um, but kind of from a third party where J.K. Rowling was talking about what her thoughts about it, and then my daughter and I could discuss it a little bit, but without I wasn't coming down too hard on it, but at least we could have a conversation about it. I think that was a positive thing to do. But actually getting into the nitty gritty of how gender ideology is an online cult and kind of explaining its dynamics and all of that, like I haven't really gone there because of my concern that it's just going to alienate her. Um, so maybe I'll just pause there.
So you have not shared your opinion that this is a cult.
I haven't directly shared it.
And how much have you talked about the cult that you were involved in together as a family?
We've talked about that extensively. She's very well aware of it.
Just thinking.
Yeah, I mean to add more color to that, like she has seen me go through my whole healing process from post-traumatic stress disorder. We've talked extensively about the abuse that went on. She had her own mild experiences of abuse while we were there. Thankfully, they were mild. There were other kids who got a lot more difficult experiences happening to them. So, she's aware of cults and cult dynamics. Um, and yet, I haven't gone as far to draw the direct connection yet with what's happening with gender ideology.
Mm. And given the fact that you, while you were in the throes of PTSD, you were frankly a pretty bad parent for a while there, right?
Yes.
And you've been open with me about that just now on this podcast. So, what have your conversations with your daughter and the rest of your family been like about that? I imagine there's been some expressions of remorse and attempts to repair the damage from those times.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, most of it is just trying to, I've really turned over a new leaf in many ways. So it's like I said, it's like the family, it's like my kids had their dad back. Um, and in terms of repair, I've certainly explained to them that, I don't want to parent the way that I was before. And um, I've been open with my daughter. She's 15, going on 16 in just a couple weeks here. I've been very open with her that I went through psychedelic therapy, and explained how all of that worked, so she could understand, um, kind of the transformation. Um, so yeah, like she's got a pretty clear idea of the path that I've been on.
So, have you there my thoughts are forming, and sometimes they start off as sort of this nebulous creative cloud, and in therapy there's a lot of room to kind of move slowly, but on the podcast I
Yeah.
hope that our listeners
Yeah.
aren't going to be too bored by how long it's going to take me to put my thoughts together on this. But um earlier you said the root of this is clear. Our daughter suffered from trauma in a religious cult and is trying to find a way to deal with that trauma. And you said creating a trans identity is a way to package all of that pain and say that was the old me. Now there's the new me. And you said that she's aware she's doing this. So, have
Yep.
you ever responded to that by saying, no, sweetie, that was the old me. Those were my mistakes. I got us involved in that cult. I'm responsible for the abuse that you endured in our cult and at my own hands when I was unwell. Have you ever tried to kind of swallow the poison like that?
I haven't articulated it that way with her, and I would have no opposition to doing that. I mean, that sounds, that definitely sounds like an interesting approach.
As a therapist, I've gotten an up close and personal view at what people tend to struggle with day in and day out. Turns out it's almost universal that we know we should be taking better care of ourselves in terms of the basic building blocks of well being, like diet and exercise. But as valuable as it is for our mental and physical health to change our lifestyle habits, it's also much easier said than done. People often set goals that are too lofty, only to feel even worse about themselves when their aspirations inevitably fail. That's why I recommend starting with positive changes that are as simple as possible. Enter my new favorite beverage line. Organifi makes it so easy to improve your nutrition and start feeling better right now with refreshing plant-based blends of superfoods and adaptogens that you can just mix with water. My personal favorite is their green juice. It contains moringa, ashwagandha, chlorella, spirulina, wheatgrass, beets, turmeric, mint, lemon, and coconut water. 100% organic with no added sugar, and it tastes great. My family loves Organifi Gold, which promotes relaxation and restful sleep, served mixed with warm almond milk before bed. Organifi also makes several other powerful blends, all organic and loaded with vitamins, minerals, antioxidants, phytonutrients, anti-inflammatory herbs, and adaptogens. For less than $3 and 3 grams of sugar per serving, you can start giving your cells the support they need to manage stress and feel good. Check out their product line at Organifi.com. That's spelled ORGANIFI.com. And use promo code SOMETHERAPIST to get 20% off your entire order. Your whole body will thank you. Well, I'll share my thought process on that a little bit more. It's about how we internalize things as children, and we all do, but girls internalize more than boys. Um, and it's funny how much girls are behaving exactly like teenage girls when they're claiming to be boys because they're demonstrating all the things that girls have always done, just calling themselves boys in the process. So internalizing, right? Um, you can see that she was just a young, innocent child. But for her, at 15 going on 16, she still feels the shame of that being her fault. Um, and so it seems like maybe she's trying to cut off and reject that part of her that she's labeled as bad. And it takes people years of therapy and growing up and stepping into their own role as parents in their 30s, oftentimes, before they're really able to look back and see, oh, I was really just an innocent child. I didn't deserve any of that. How was I supposed to know? I shouldn't have felt like that was my fault, or like that made me a bad person. But at her age, she's not nearly there yet, right? So that would be something that I would suspect is maybe going on, is that she's overly identified with or internalized some of the bad things that went on as a result, both of direct participation in the cult, growing up in that environment, and of what it did to you and the impact of your PTSD on the family. And so this sort of trans identification is an attempt to cut off this part of her that's bad, the feminine vulnerability, the growing up as a girl, right? Having been a girl. Um, and and for many of these girls, I'm not sure if this is your daughter, but the masculine alter ego creates a false sense of confidence and protection from the harms and evils of the world. And so for many girls, that's about being objectified or sexually harassed, for example. But it could really be any number of things. And in my work with ROGD parents, I've heard reports of kids coming out with their heads kind of spinning to integrate how it shifts their whole sense of self and their narrative about them when parents take responsibility for the fact that that was their mistake. And so, for example, in cases where a kid identified as the opposite sex from early on, and their parent got, let's say, bad advice and affirmed them. And then as puberty is getting closer, the parent's trying to walk it back because they realize if they continue down this path, it's a path of lifelong medicalization. So the kid is saying, I've always known this about myself ever since I was whatever age. The parent steps in and says, no, I did that to you. I made a mistake. I got the wrong advice. You were a 4-year old. You didn't know. You thought that being a girl meant, liking princesses, and being a boy meant playing with trucks. And so, based on your 4-year old understanding of what makes us girls and boys, you said this about yourself. And I, like an idiot, believed you. And I didn't hold the appropriate boundaries and tell you what actually makes you a girl or a boy. This is my fault. Right. And when the parent does that, it leaves the kid's head spinning, but in a way that I think is ultimately productive of change, because there's a huge change in perspective that needs to happen for the kid, which is that they're not the authority figure. And they especially weren't the authority figure when they were 4 years old. And they're not an authority figure now that they're 16 either. They are young and vulnerable, and they weren't protected, or they weren't given the appropriate guidance. And when the parent takes responsibility for that, it kind of puts the kid back in their place, which is, you're a child, you don't know yourself, you don't have it all figured out. It's not your job to. It's not your job to self-diagnose. It's not your job to tell doctors that you need the so-called life-saving care that's really, like, you don't know where it's going to lead you, right? So it kind of reestablishes parental authority. And then the kid has to kind of rethink their whole narrative. And this is also occurring at a time when the kid is, like you were saying earlier, trying to individuate, trying to develop a separate identity from their parents. So if you as the parent take responsibility, no, it's my fault that you were hurt and confused, and that you kind of stumbled into, because I didn't protect you from the internet too, that you stumbled into this idea, but I'm here to set the record straight. This is my mistake and I'm going to fix it. And that can really kind of readjust things for the kid. So how does that land with you?
Yeah, thanks for sharing all that. So I think that's really great advice, and I hope it helps uh, everybody who's listening, or all the parents that are listening that are struggling with similar issues.
Okay, so you've expressed an interest in mindfulness and psychedelics and the connections between them. Before we resume that conversation, I'm still curious for more of your observations about the connections between the cult that you were in and the cult that you see your daughter as being in. You've said that you have not chosen to voice your opinion that she's in a cult, but do you feel like your own experience in a cult has shifted or informed your perceptions witnessing your daughter get involved in gender ideology?
Yeah, this is a great question because the gender ideology phenomenon that's going on right now is really something new from a historical perspective. So let me maybe it would help to talk a little bit about what a cult is and then kind of expand from there. So a cult, the definition that I really like the best is a high control community. And there's a spectrum, right? Like on one side of that spectrum, you might have something like Jonestown, where everybody commits suicide together. And on the other side of that spectrum, you might have like a multi-level marketing scam, where you're being controlled in a kind of business environment. So along that spectrum of control, religious communities will fall somewhere. Even a traditional, you know, bona fide church is going to have a certain level of control that it exerts over its members. And when taken to an extreme, it really becomes extremely detrimental to the lives of the people involved. And so that's the kind of cult we were in where, everything was controlled. Everything from what, honestly, what you eat, because there are certain days where there was strict fasting that was imposed, to when you have sex with your partner, um, you know, and it's hard for people who haven't been in a situation like this to understand how anybody could submit to that level of control. The other thing about the cult that we were involved with is that it was led by a very charismatic authority figure and religious authority figure. So, that's very different from, if we want to start now comparing and contrasting this kind of traditional cult where you've got a charismatic leader controlling the lives of his or her followers. That's kind of the image of a cult that most people probably have. But when you look at what's going on with gender ideology, it's different, right? Because it's distributed. First of all, it's decentralized. There is no single leader or mastermind behind the whole thing. Um, Gender ideology is something that has kind of evolved, and uh, I kind of like to look at this from the perspective of memetics, and for listeners who maybe aren't familiar with this idea, like memetics is this idea that ideas themselves are mutating and reproducing and evolving in the substrate of human culture. And that's kind of what's happening here, where gender ideology has evolved to fit some really specific ecological niches, ecological niches in our culture. Where, for example, just the way the internet itself works, it's a medium where these kind of ideas can spread very rapidly. Then you look at the kind of psychological needs of teenagers. There's a huge gaping void there, ready to absorb anything that's going to give them answers or make them feel like they have an identity in a fairly rootless culture, which is kind of like the one that we're living in. Then, you look at, there's a political sphere where there's a vacuum here as well, where if you think about, all of the strides that have been made for gay rights, which I think are great. The problem is that the trans rights have hitched a ride right alongside that, so that in many people's minds they're one and the same thing, when in fact they're not, because there's this whole medical aspect. Then you add in this, the part of this where the medical industry, there's so much money to be made. So when I look at this from a memetics perspective, the ideology has evolved to fit all of these niches perfectly. And so it's this new phenomenon where it's not like a traditional cult where there's one kind of leader. It's not like a traditional religion where it's offering a clear idea of salvation, though there is hidden in it this idea of salvation, where if you just uh, take the medicine, so to speak, if you go down this role of transition, all of your problems are going to get solved. So it shares a lot of elements with traditional cults and traditional religions. And at the same time, I really feel that this is a new phenomenon, and it shares, and it's got characteristics that we've never seen before, all combined into one social phenomenon.
That was brilliant. I have nothing to add to that. Thank you.
It's terrifying though, right? Because you can also see connections to fascism, right? Like, right now, this just came up the other day where Google was basically showing a business like put put these flags or icons in your business website to make it more LGBTQ friendly. Right now, that's just a suggestion to show fealty to the movement. But in a few years, if you don't do it, then then your silence is going to be looked at uh, uh, as opposing it, and you're going to be looked at as a political enemy. That could happen, right? So there's a political side to this too, which is quite scary. So anyway, I think we're dealing with a new phenomenon, and I really think that people who are social scientists and more qualified to really think through all of this than I am and draw historical comparisons should get on with it because there's really something here.
Let's talk about mindfulness and psychedelics. You said that they've both been helpful to you and that you see a lot of similarities between the two. So, what are those similarities?
Yeah, well, I want to actually say something or reflect something that you brought up earlier. You said, parents shouldn't lose themselves, or they should avoid losing themselves in gender ideology in, once they're, when they're trying to deal with these situations with their kids. And I thought that was a really interesting expression because so much of mindfulness is actually recognizing the contingent or almost illusory nature of what we refer to as the self. Um, and and so it's funny, like you have to lose yourself in order not to lose yourself in these kind of problems. And when we talk about losing the sense of self or seeing through the illusory nature of self in mindfulness, uh, it this is it's a really profound um, uh, recognition of the way things actually are. And what I mean by that is that uh, if you think about uh, maybe I'll take the approach of how I think people generally approach mindfulness. They think of it like, oh, this is like a self-help kind of thing, right? Like I'm gonna focus on my breath, I'm gonna calm down, I'm gonna relax, and all of that's true, right? Like you can get a lot of self-help like that just through basic uh, breathing or basic mindfulness practices. But the reality is that this is a lot deeper than all of that. It's mindfulness is about seeing the ego for what it is, which is as a complex of thoughts that arise in the mind, and that the true self, quote unquote, is something other than that. And so um, I actually joke about this that I want my pronouns to be it. I identify as pure consciousness. Like that's my real identity. The ego constructions that I make are contingent. They serve purposes, and but they're not what or who I really am. And so mindfulness is a way of coming into contact on a more and more regular basis with what one truly is, and then carrying that into everyday life. So that it's not just when you're sitting in meditation that you have the experience of simply being loving awareness, but that it's just happening all the time and it's just what you are. Um, maybe I'll pause there so you can ask questions, or I can clarify things.
Well, the way you describe your understanding of mindfulness sounds potentially very healing. I think there's a direction that one can go with that gets kind of dissociated. But I also hear a lot of liberation in that. And I'm thinking about how to help detransitioners and the cycles that a lot of them get caught in, where people who are no longer identifying as the opposite sex, no longer believe in the tenets of gender ideology, then want to, let's say, pass as their own sex again and are finding it difficult. So women who've had mastectomies and been on testosterone, maybe they have a receding hairline, maybe they have to shave, their voice is deep. And so they're struggling with this whole new type of what you could call gender dysphoria. And many seek so-called reversal surgeries, although we know that true reversal isn't possible because if a woman has lost her breasts, breast implants are not going to have the same function as mammary glands, for example. But there are some things that can be done that might alleviate some of the distress associated with, looking like the opposite sex when you're no longer thinking that way. And especially for those who feel like their time spent in gender ideology was a cult for them. Um, but I'm thinking about how many detransitioners end up in this kind of trap where they're sort of repeating the same cycles that they were doing while they were identified as trans, because they were always in pursuit of the next level of intervention, the next level of surgery, hormones, passing, affirmation, and so on. And they became established as medical patients from a young age where they could have been healthy. And then when they're detransitioning, then they go through this like, well, now I need this surgery and I need that body modification because I'm trying to look like a woman again. And it can be expensive and invasive and re-traumatizing to the body. And so the reason I'm bringing all this up is because some of the people who seem to be sort of the furthest along in their healing process, I don't know. I don't mean that in a way to compare, but the people who are finding a lot of compassion for themselves are, from my perspective, sort of following this path of radical self-acceptance. And I'm trying to say this with as much humility as possible because I can't know what it's like to be in that position and have had those changes to my body. But I've seen some detransitioners just sort of give up on trying to pass as anything, give up on this kind of relentless push to modify their bodies and their appearances, instead just coming from it from a place of radical self-acceptance. Like, this is my body exactly as it is. It's been through these things. I'm sorry. I love myself. And I'm just going to work on accepting myself exactly as I am in the body that I have, even though it doesn't look the way it looked before, even though it doesn't look the way most people of my sex look. That sort of radical self-acceptance. And I've seen that for some people, coupled with this kind of mindfulness attitude that you describe. And that's the connection that I see, right? That there is this illusory nature of self and seeing the ego for what it really is. You said a complex of thoughts that arise in the mind, which is not the true self. So it's this like, I am not any of these constructs. I am not what I look like. Yes, I am my body. But I'm also more than that. So it seems to me like mindfulness and for some detransitioners, they've reported that that is connected to psychedelics as well. Um, really helps with this like radical self-acceptance and coming home to the body without desiring more essentially like harm and invasion to the body just to make it superficially appear a certain way.
Yeah, I all of that resonates. Like a big part of mindfulness is just recognizing that that now is enough, meaning what's happening right now is enough. What when you're sitting in meditation and you might be focusing on the feelings that are arising in the body. You might be focusing on the breath. You might in what I like to practice is Dzogchen meditation, and this is what is kind of at the heart of the Waking Up app, which Sam Harris puts out, which I strongly encourage people to try. In Dzogchen, it's more of a diffuse attention where you're paying attention to everything that's arising and passing away, and a big part of that is recognizing that I don't need more than what's happening right now. And I don't need to change anything. And so that kind of attitude, when cultivated, can directly impact how you think about your life and your body. That, yeah, I don't need to change anything. This is now is enough. This is enough. And I think the a connection with psychedelics, and this is where this can get a little bit. Uh, some of these ideas may be new to to your listeners, so maybe strap in your seatbelt a little bit and just kind of go along for the ride for a minute. With psychedelics, one of the things that you recognize pretty quickly is that the world that you see is a construction. Your body, in a sense, it's a construction of the mind, right? Like you don't see three-dimensional space, for example. You see your retina is providing a lot of pulsating nerve signals to your brain, uh, representing different colors and shadows. Your brain constructs the world that you live in. In the same way, it actually constructs your your image of your body, where your brain creates a self model that's then embedded in the world model that it's constructing. These are things that your mind is constructing, and when you take psychedelics and you watch that construction dissolve, change, transform, you realize, oh, okay, this is just a construction. And and part of this is that, taking it a level deeper, the things that you think about yourself are also constructions. And if you can change those things, you can come to a state of peace with what is. And and psychedelics can kind of facilitate that understanding. And it doesn't even need to be necessarily like an ongoing use, right? Like, I like what Alan Watts says. He said once you get the message, you can hang up the phone. And and and, and I think there's a lot of nuance that I could add to that, because I think there are times when people, really may need to take medicines again, to work through deeper levels of PTSD, to get more neurogenesis or neuroplasticity. But in general, from a philosophical perspective, like, once you realize that, like, you're constructing the world, you're constructing your image of yourself, you're um you can then say, what presuppositions am I bringing to this? What am I projecting onto others? What am I projecting onto my view of the world that are coloring it? And how can I let those things go? And I think psychedelics can help open that up for people, and then mindfulness or meditation practice can help kind of cement it uh, um, on an ongoing basis. I don't know if all of that made sense. I know I took a little bit of a deeper dive into even how the brain and how the mind work, but maybe I'll just pause there.
I think that's great. That's what you're here for, to bring your own unique perspective on these issues. And I'm so glad that we've gotten to explore this unique confluence of your experiences in cults and raising a daughter who's currently, believing that she's a boy as a way of sort of compartmentalizing her pain, and then the insights that you've gained from psychedelics, mindfulness, trauma recovery. I think it's all wonderful. So, in our last few minutes here, is there any sort of cherry that you want to put on top of all this, or anything that we forgot to get to?
Yeah, I really just want to encourage parents who are struggling, that, and this is, I'm speaking to myself just as much as I'm speaking to all of them who are listening, that the most important thing is our own groundedness and our own um, peace. Because if we're not at peace, then we're not going to be able to help um, the people around us and our kids find a place of peace. So, um, think about, what kind of practices you might want to adopt to help facilitate that. And I know with mindfulness, there's often a big stumbling block for people, where, especially folks coming from a religious background, can look at meditation and say, oh, this is like Eastern religion, and this, I don't need this. I have Jesus. I can just pray. And I want to, and I think I want to help people, um, or encourage people to really have an open mind, that, like, mindfulness is not, it doesn't require any dogmatic belief, right? Like, you don't need to, you don't actually need to believe anything to try sitting with the breath, for example, or to try some of the other mindfulness exercises and just see what happens. So it's not a requirement to believe anything about it. It's simply a practice that you try. And I know many Christians who have combined mindfulness practices successfully in their life alongside of their religious beliefs with absolutely no conflict. And I also see it from the other side that a lot of atheists are like, oh, this mindfulness stuff is just another kind of religion, and I don't want to have any religion. I just want to be rational. Again, it's the same thing. You don't need to believe something to try a mindfulness practice out, where and just see if it's benefiting you. So if you're a parent that's struggling with a kid suffering from gender dysphoria or any of the other struggles that a parent might have, I can't encourage you enough to give mindfulness practice a try. It really can be a life-changing practice.
I think that's excellent encouragement, and it's coming from a place of integrity as someone who has worked with this practice and found so much benefit in it yourself. So, you wrote an article on PIT, Parents with Inconvenient Truths About Trans. I also interviewed some parents from PIT recently, so you can find that episode, Parents with Inconvenient Truths About Trans. They have a new book that just came out of the same name. Um, so I will link to the article that you wrote about your psychedelic experience on PIT in the show notes. Are there any other resources that you would encourage people to check out, or anywhere people can find your work?
Yeah, so I would encourage people who are interested in getting involved with mindfulness to give the Waking Up app a try. There's lots of apps out there. This is the one that I use, and it's been, like I said, pretty transformative. I would also encourage people who are interested in learning more about psychedelics to look at the work that's been done by MAPS. That's MAPS, the Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Science, and that's run by a fantastic person named Rick Doblin, and I think there's just a lot of great resources, about uh, psychedelic medicine. You can also check out How to Change Your Mind. It's a book by Michael Pollan. It's also a Netflix documentary. It's a great introduction. Um, and I think many cities now have psychedelic communities or psychedelic societies where you can connect with people to learn more. Um, so it's becoming much more accepted in the culture. It's really there's a huge resurgence uh, in psychedelics that are happening, and I would encourage people who feel called to explore that realm for, whether it's for healing or personal growth, to do so safely and with guidance, and not just don't do it on your own if you're new to it. And obviously, like, um, I recognize that you can't endorse something like that on your show per se. I'm just speaking as an anonymous guest on your show, that if it's that there can be a tremendous amount of healing and benefit when used in the right way, but it's not a panacea. So it's got to be used in the right container.
Alan, thank you so much for joining me today and sharing your unusual story. I really think a lot of listeners will find parts of themselves here, and I hope that they found some benefit in this as well.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. This has been a great opportunity.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of You Must Be Some Kind of Therapist podcast. To check out my book recommendations, articles, wellness products, guest episodes on other podcasts, consulting services, and lots more, visit sometherapist.com or follow me on Twitter or Instagram at sometherapist. If you'd like to go deeper, join my community at somekindoftherapist.locals.com. Members can dialogue with other listeners, post questions for upcoming podcast guests to respond to, or ask questions for me to respond to in exclusive members-only Q&A live streams. To learn more about the gender crisis, watch our film, No Way Back, The Reality of Gender-Affirming Care at nowaybackfilm.com. Special thanks to my producers, Eric and Amber Beals at Different Mix, and to Joey Pecoraro for our theme song, Half Awake. If you appreciate this podcast and want more people to find it, kindly take a moment to rate, review, like, comment, and share on your platforms of choice. Of course, just because I am some therapist doesn't mean I'm your therapist. This podcast is not a substitute for medical advice. If you need help, ask your doctor or browse your local therapists online. And whatever you do next, please take care of yourself. Eat well, sleep well, move your body, get outside, and tell someone you love them. You're worth it.